Hi, today I want to take a little time to talk you through some steps that will help you outline and draft your literature review, Project 3. I'm going to walk you through a document that I'll also post in this week's folder so that you have it for easy review, but I want to talk to you about some examples that go along with it. The first thing that you should do this week is review the assignments that you turned in Sunday night, your visualization of your sources in Blog 5, and your annotated bibliographies to start to look for connections between the texts that you wrote about. I'm going to do the same thing when I look at each of your assignments at the beginning of this week. So you want to pay attention to places where the texts address the same topic or concept, but maybe using the same terms, maybe using different names for the same concepts or processes. So for example, in some of the scholarship that I look at on knowledge transfer, some scholars talk about when students use prior knowledge in a new writing situation as recontextualizing it. Some of them will talk about terms like positive transfer. Some will talk about remixing, and they don't mean all the same exact thing, but they're about the same moment in the writing process. You might look for places where writers look at the same concept but from different perspectives, where they present counterpoints or disagree with each other, where they use different methodological approaches to look at the same phenomenon, or perhaps where they study a different population with similar research questions. So what I would say to do would be to print out your visualization. If you have a digital copy of it, print it out and see if you need to make any additional notes on that visualization to help you see connections in Microsoft Word or on a printed copy of your annotated bibliographies. Use the highlighting tool so that you can, when you see important words that pop up, you can pay attention to those things as well. The next thing you should do then is just make a separate list of these themes or keywords that emerge from your review of the sources. Which themes, ideas, concepts, or terms stand out as the most significant shared points of discussion. And this should also tie to, of course, your research questions. So make sure your source is already tied to those research questions, but make sure that you're paying attention to the themes or keywords that seem most significant for addressing that. So for example, in the text by Elizabeth Wardle, Identity, Authority, and Learning to Write in New Workplaces, Wardle includes a section on identity and a section on authority in her literature review, and she puts the text that she is writing about in terms of those two major concepts. Let's look at that for a quick second. So last week I talked for a second about part of the map of Wardle's introduction where she explains how her literature review is going to be organized. And then if we just quickly skim down, we can see her first section is on identity, and she explains why she is positioning that first, okay, and includes activity theory, David Russell, theories about communities of practice through Levin Wenger here. And then she moves into discussing authority and the ways that the writers that she's looking at speak to that topic. A couple of weeks ago, I described one of the research projects that I am doing in preparation for writing and doing a conference presentation. And so this week, just like you're working on your literature reviews, I'm working on mine. And my method of organization at this point is to present my literature review in terms of 5 descriptors of the potential impact of silence as a rhetorical tool or a rhetorical responsibility, and to trace the several texts that I'm looking at through these descriptions. So in my first reading through the text, what I did was took notes, just like you did in your annotated bibliography. on the key ideas and arguments presented by each of those texts. And then as I reviewed those, I was able to pull out these 5 descriptions. So you can see there's 3 and 4. And right now my draft is a really kind of spotty bunch of quotations and some of my own personal notes that I'll be using, and then I have to keep working on fleshing out that literature review. You don't have an outline due this week. However, it's imperative that you write an outline to help you prepare your draft of your literature review. It's important also that you keep in mind that in a literature review, you don't write about the texts one after the other. You've already done that in your annotated bibliography, and so it shouldn't just be, here's what person A said, then here's what person B said, then here's what person C said. And in fact, you might keep coming back to the same authors throughout your literature review if that's relevant. Instead, you should organize your literature review according to those terms, narrowing to your specific topic. So overall, this outline should have first an introduction section that explains the exigence of your research questions, or like why the field is interested in these research questions at all, why they're important, why it's important that you're asking these questions right now, what's the impact of these research questions for understanding something important in the field. And then also your introduction should include your actual research question or questions in it. Most of the draft is, of course, the literature review, and that's organized in the terms of the keywords or themes that you've selected, and should narrow from a broader discussion to your specific topic. It might be helpful for you to take a few minutes to Google the phrase literature review funnel for some helpful images here. For example, this one right here reminds us that a general organization of a literature review looks like a funnel where you start with broader topics, then move into subtopics that are important, and then look at those discussions that are specifically like the one that you're looking at. But if you take a second to Google that, you'll see a number of images that might be helpful for you considering the specific kind of field that you are writing in. So check that out. In the end of your outline, you should plan a conclusion that summarizes the major discussions around the topic. When you move into the drafting phase of your literature review in the second part of this week, make sure that your draft includes these assignment criteria: disciplinary and professional formatting, so whether you're using MLA, APA, AMA, some other kind of format, whatever one that you're supposed to be using in your field, make sure that the draft has the formatting in it. Don't go back to add that later. Do it while you're writing it. You're working on building a draft that's 2,000 to 2,500 words, not including the bibliography. Again, that has the proper in-text and bibliographic citation. The assignment description says 8, but we've been talking about 6 sources. There's not necessarily a rule that the more sources, the better, but you might continue to uncover sources that you want to use as you work on your draft. So just keep in mind a range of 6 to 10 sources will be manageable for this. And then you'll also want to use section headings to organize and signpost content for readers. So take a look at how Wardle's done that and look back at the scholarly articles that you've been reading for your genre analysis papers, because many of you wrote about headings and how those helped organize a text. It would be a really smart idea to review the literature review sections of those various scholarly texts that you've been looking at to see how they've been structuring them. And take a look at the student sample that is in this week's folder as well. Each of the process steps that we're working on for this assignment is intended to help you move forward a little bit. So take full advantage of those processes. Do things like read the sample text that I've included in the folders, but also look back at, like I just said, look back at the scholarly texts that you've been reviewing to look at how their literature reviews are constructed. This is a peer response week, and I have organized you in groups as best as possible to reflect shared disciplinary interests so that you might come into this peer response activity with some shared ideas or understandings of the way that different discourse communities work, with more familiarity with the lexis that you'll be reading in these literature review drafts. Keep working on uploading and commenting on your multimodal presentations, which are intended to help you get feedback for working on your literature review, but also moving forward into drafting the research proposal where you're going to design your own study. The other thing that I'm asking you to do this week is to write a midterm reflection, and this is to help you assess your work in the course so far. A handful of you have been asking me about grades, and I'm reminding you to review the grade contract in the syllabus and also the checklist that I emailed you a couple of weeks ago that's designed to help you keep track of how you're doing on that grade contract, whether you're meeting the B criteria, whether you're not meeting it, or maybe might be exceeding that B criteria based on having a higher average of your final projects. I'm happy to talk to you about grades in person in conference settings. So if you want to come see me during office hours and go over that stuff with me, that's helpful. But I also think that working on this midterm reflection for Sunday will help you think about how you're doing in the course. Have a good week. Expect some feedback from me early, and I look forward to seeing what is emerging through your literature reviews.